German scientist vanished in 1945. 80 years later, his hidden research lab was found. March 17, 2024, Harz Mountains, Lower Saxony, Germany. The Geological Survey team wasn't looking for history when they drilled into the granite face of the Brocken Massif. Dr. Helena Kreisler and her crew from the Federal Institute for Geosciences and Natural Resources had arrived at dawn, their ground-penetrating radar equipment detecting an anomaly 17 meters beneath the mountain's western slope. The readings suggested a void, something that shouldn't exist in solid Paleozoic rock. By 11:47 a.m., the drill bit broke through into empty space. "We've hit a chamber," Kreisler radioed to base camp, her breath visible in the cold mountain air. "Structurally reinforced. This isn't natural." What followed was a 48-hour operation involving alpine specialists, structural engineers, and, within 24 hours, representatives from the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution. The cavity wasn't a natural cave formation. It was a laboratory, sealed since 1945, its entrance obliterated by a precisely engineered collapse that had buried the access tunnel under 11,000 tons of rock. The laboratory measured 43 meters in length, 19 meters wide, with a vaulted ceiling 8 meters high at its apex. Power generators, corroded but intact, stood in one corner. Laboratory benches lined both walls, still laden with equipment, centrifuges, vacuum chambers, glass apparatus coated in decades of dust. Filing cabinets contained waterlogged but legible documents stamped with the SS Reichssicherheitsbeamten seal, the Reich Security main office. But it was the personal effects that made Dr. Kreisler's hands shake as she photographed them on March 19, 2024. A leather satchel, remarkably preserved in the underground environment's constant temperature and humidity, contained a Soldbuch, a Wehrmacht pay book, bearing the photograph and signature of SS Sturmbannführer Dr. Werner Friedrich Heisenberg Kessler, serial number 445.782, assigned to Waffenamt Research Division 9, Prüfwesen Section. Birth date: November 8, 1904 in Heidelberg. The photograph showed a lean-faced man with prominent cheekbones, wire-rimmed glasses, and the distinctive collar tabs of the Schutzstaffel. Next to the satchel lay a laboratory journal, its pages filled with meticulous handwriting in German, dated entries running from January 1943 through April 28, 1945, 3 days before the official German surrender. The final entry read, "Evacuation order ignored. Work must continue. They will not find this place. WFHK." According to official records held by the German Federal Archives in Koblenz, SS Sturmbannführer Dr. Werner Heisenberg Kessler died on April 11, 1945, during the American artillery bombardment of the Mittelbaudora complex near Nordhausen, approximately 47 kilometers from the Brocken laboratory. His death certificate, filed by the SS Personnel Main Office on April 30, 1945, mere hours before Hitler's suicide, stated that his body was identified by dental records and interred in a mass grave designated MBD 47A. The problem was immediately apparent to forensic historians who arrived on March 21, 2024. The handwriting in the laboratory journal dated April 28, 1945, 17 days after Heisenberg Kessler's supposed death, matched verified samples of his signature from Wehrmacht personnel files with 99.7% certainty, according to analysis conducted by Dr. Johann Mayer, Chief Forensic Document Examiner for the Bundeskriminalamt. Someone had faked Werner Heisenberg Kessler's death, and he had continued working in this hidden laboratory weeks after the war ended. The deeper Dr. Kreisler's team excavated the site, the more disturbing the discoveries became. A second chamber, connected by a narrow passage, contained living quarters, a military cot, canned rations stamped with Wehrmacht commissary codes, a portable radio receiver, and most chilling, a detailed topographical map of northern Germany with a route marked in red ink leading from the Harz Mountains through Goslar, across the lower Saxon plain, to the port city of Bremerhaven. Departure date written in margin, May 15, 1945. If you want to see what investigators found in Werner Heisenberg Kessler's escape route, and discover how a man officially dead for 80 years managed to vanish without a trace, hit the like button and subscribe. Werner Friedrich Heisenberg Kessler was born on November 8, 1904, in Heidelberg, Baden-Württemberg, to a family of academic distinction. His father, Professor Dr. Friedrich Kessler, held the chair of theoretical physics at Heidelberg University. His mother, Marguerite Heisenberg Kessler, was a distant cousin of the famed physicist Werner Heisenberg, a connection that would later prove both advantageous and complicated for young Werner. By age 17, Heisenberg Kessler had published his first paper on quantum mechanics in the Zeitschrift für Physik, demonstrating an intuitive grasp of wave-particle duality that caught the attention of his namesake relative. He completed his doctorate at the University of Göttingen in 1927, under the supervision of Max Born, with a dissertation titled Nonlinear Resonance Phenomena in Accelerated Particle Systems. The academic world seemed his destiny. Between 1927 and 1933, Heisenberg Kessler published 14 peer-reviewed papers, accepted a junior professorship at the University of Munich, and married Elsa Adler, the daughter of a prominent Berlin attorney, on June 12, 1930. Their daughter, Greta, was born March 3, 1931. Their son, Klaus, arrived November 19, 1933. But 1933 brought seismic changes to Germany. Hitler's ascension to power in January initiated a purge of Jewish academics from German universities. Elsa Heisenberg Kessler's father, though Lutheran by faith, had Jewish grandparents, enough to classify the family as Misklinge under the Nuremberg laws that would arrive in 1935. Werner faced an impossible choice. His wife's partial Jewish heritage endangered his position, his family's safety, and his research opportunities. According to declassified Gestapo files recovered in 2003 from former East German archives, Werner received an ultimatum in September 1934 from SS Brigadeführer Reinhard Heydrich himself: divorce Elsa and denounce her Jewish connections, or face professional destruction. Werner's decision remains one of the most morally complex aspects of his biography. On November 11, 1934, Werner filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The proceedings, conducted with unusual speed by the Berlin family court, concluded on January 8, 1935. Custody of Greta and Klaus went to Elsa. Werner, according to court documents, was granted visitation rights of 2 weekends per month. 3 weeks later, on January 29, 1935, Werner joined the SS as an Untersturmführer, second lieutenant, assigned to the newly formed Waffenamt Research Division 9, focused on advanced weapons development. His ex-wife and children moved to her father's estate in Brandenburg. Werner moved to Berlin, renting an apartment at Kurfürstendamm 187, where he would live alone for the next 10 years. What drove Werner Heisenberg Kessler to betray his family remains debated among historians. Personal letters archived at the Institut für Zeitgeschichte in Munich reveal a man consumed by ambition, yet tormented by guilt. In a letter dated March 4, 1935, one day after his daughter's 4th birthday, Werner wrote to his former university advisor, Max Born: "I have made choices that ensure my work continues. The cost is unbearable, but what are personal sacrifices against the advancement of human knowledge? You, in your exile, cannot understand what pressures exist here. I do what I must." Born, who had fled to England, never replied. Between 1935 and 1939, Heisenberg Kessler rose through Wehrmacht research ranks with remarkable speed. His work focused on electromagnetic acceleration systems, primitive particle accelerators intended to study atomic structure, though the military applications were never far from consideration. He achieved the rank of Hauptsturmführer, captain, in 1937, then Sturmbannführer, major, in 1940. His technical brilliance was undeniable. Patent applications filed between 1936 and 1941, declassified by the German Patent Office in 1995, show innovations in high-voltage switching, magnetic field containment, and vacuum chamber design that predated similar Allied developments by months or years. But Werner remained isolated, personally and socially. Colleagues at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physics, where he maintained a research appointment, described him as brilliant but cold, dedicated but friendless. SS Hauptsturmführer Klaus Bauer, who worked adjacent to Werner's laboratory from 1938 to 1943, testified during his 1947 war crimes trial. Heisenberg Kessler spoke to no one unless necessary. He arrived before dawn, departed after dark. I never saw him at social functions, never heard him discuss politics or family. He existed solely for his research. We joked that he was married to his equipment. Perhaps Werner's isolation stemmed from knowledge of what happened to his former family. On the night of March 15, 1943, RAF Bomber Command conducted Operation Gravelpit, a massive raid on Berlin targeting industrial sectors. Over 600 aircraft dropped high-explosive and incendiary bombs across the city's eastern districts. The Adler family estate in Brandenburg, 23 kilometers from the primary target zone, should have been safe. But a single Lancaster bomber, designated ED-763, damaged by flak and losing altitude, jettisoned its remaining bomb load at 37 hours over rural Brandenburg before attempting an emergency landing in Poland. One 4,000-pound Cookie high-capacity bomb struck the Adler estate with direct precision. The explosion killed Elsa Heisenberg Kessler instantly. Greta, age 12, died in the firestorm that followed. Klaus, age 9, survived 3 hours before succumbing to burns at a field hospital in Potsdam. Official notification reached Werner on March 17, 1943, via telegram from the SS Personnel Main Office. His response, witnessed by his laboratory assistant Franz Kellermann, was chilling in its restraint. Werner read the telegram, placed it carefully on his desk, and said, "I have work to complete." He did not attend their funeral. He did not request leave. According to laboratory logs maintained by Waffenamt administration, Werner worked continuously for the next 68 hours, sleeping briefly on a cot in his laboratory, eating rations brought by assistants. Something in Werner broke that March, but what emerged from that breaking wasn't grief, it was obsession. Within weeks, Werner requested reassignment to a new project, the development of advanced research facilities in secure, bomb-proof locations. His proposal, submitted to SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, chief of SS construction projects, on April 2, 1943, outlined a network of underground laboratories carved into mountains across Germany, impervious to aerial bombardment. Kammler approved the proposal on April 19, 1943. Werner's new assignment: construct and equip a research facility beneath the Brocken, the Harz Mountain's highest peak, far from Allied bombing routes, invisible to reconnaissance aircraft. Construction began June 1, 1943. Werner oversaw every detail personally, spending weeks underground supervising excavation, installation, and equipment placement. The project, designated Anlage Hex, facility which, a reference to the mountain's folklore associations, was completed January 15, 1944. For the next 16 months, Werner worked in isolation beneath 1 million tons of granite, developing electromagnetic weapons systems that official records suggest never achieved operational status. His small team, never more than 4 assistants at any time, rotated monthly, ensuring no one besides Werner understood the project's full scope. By early 1945, as Allied armies closed on Germany from east and west, Werner faced inevitable defeat. But he was planning something far different from suicide in a Berlin bunker or capture by enemy forces. He was planning to vanish. April 6, 1945. Anlage Hex Harz Mountains, 06:15 hours. Werner stood before the wall-mounted map in his underground office, red pencil in hand, marking evacuation routes from central Germany. The situation was deteriorating by the day. American forces had crossed the Rhine on March 7th. Soviet armies had reached the Oder River, 60 kilometers from Berlin. The Reich was collapsing. Official Wehrmacht communications, intercepted via Werner's unauthorized radio equipment, painted a catastrophic picture. Army Group B encircled in the Ruhr. Army Group Center fragmenting in Czechoslovakia. Himmler negotiating surrender through Swedish intermediaries. Negotiations Hitler would discover and condemn as treason within weeks. Werner had perhaps 30 days before American or Soviet forces reached the Harz region. 30 days to complete his most important experiment, his own disappearance. The plan, meticulously developed over 6 months, required precise timing and multiple contingencies. Werner had advantages most fleeing Nazis lacked. His work gave him access to resources, fabrication equipment, and, most critically, official documentation machinery. Over the previous months, Werner had created a second identity with the thoroughness he applied to experimental design. The identity papers, forged with SS-quality materials borrowed from security printing facilities, identified him as Dr. Wilhelm Hartman, born February 14, 1905, in Stuttgart. Occupation: industrial chemist. Werner had selected characteristics deliberately. Similar age, compatible background, profession plausible for a civilian seeking work in post-war Germany or abroad. But identity papers alone wouldn't ensure survival. Werner needed a death, his own death, convincing enough that no one would search for Werner Heisenberg Kessler. The opportunity came from tragedy. April 9, 1945. Mittelbaudora complex near Nordhausen, 14:30 hours. Werner made a rare surface trip, traveling by military motorcycle to the Mittelbaudora facility, where slave laborers assembled V-2 rockets in subterranean factories. The official purpose: consulting on electrical systems. The actual purpose: establishing presence at a location about to be destroyed. American forces were advancing on Nordhausen. Intelligence reports indicated arrival within 48 to 72 hours. SS guards were executing prisoners to eliminate witnesses to atrocities. The complex would become a battlefield. Werner needed witnesses who would remember seeing him there and would later testify to his death. He made certain to interact with multiple people that afternoon: the facility commandant, SS Hauptsturmführer Otto Brinkmann, the chief engineer, Dippelling, Hans Merbius, a capo prisoner named Joseph Landau, who served as a translator. Each would later provide testimony about Werner's presence on April 9th. But Werner departed Mittelbaudora at 18:00 hours, 3 hours before American artillery began ranging the complex. April 11, 1945. Mittelbaudora complex, 0800-14:00 hours. American forces of the 104th Infantry Division commenced their assault on Mittelbaudora at first light. Artillery bombardment lasted 6 hours, followed by infantry advance through the surface facilities. By 14:00 hours, American troops controlled the complex. The carnage was immense. Over 200 bodies lay scattered across the facility grounds. SS guards who fought to the end, prisoners killed in the crossfire, administrative personnel caught in the bombardment. Many bodies were burned beyond recognition, identifiable only by dental records or personal effects. Among the dead, SS medical personnel would later identify SS Sturmbannführer Dr. Werner Heisenberg Kessler, based on dental records retrieved from SS personnel archives and matched to a badly burned corpse found in the administrative building's ruins. The identification was filed April 13, 1945. The death certificate followed April 30, 1945. But Werner was alive, 47 kilometers away, in his mountain laboratory. April 11, 1945, Anlage Hex, 11:30 hours. Werner listened to Wehrmacht radio transmissions describing the Mittelbaudora assault. The plan was working. The body, belonging to an SS officer of similar height and build, killed in the bombardment, had been prepared in advance. Werner had arranged for his dental records to be matched by an SS dentist, Obersturmführer Dr. Friedrich Voss, whom Werner had been blackmailing since February 1945. Dr. Voss's secret, a Jewish wife hidden in Bavaria under false papers. Werner had discovered this through careful investigation and presented Voss with a choice: cooperate or face denunciation. Voss cooperated. The false dental match ensured Werner's official death, but Werner needed more time to complete laboratory work and finalize his escape preparations. April 12-28, 1945, Anlage Hex. For 17 days after his official death, Werner worked alone in the mountain laboratory. His assistants had been dismissed April 5th with false orders sending them to non-existent facilities in Bavaria. Werner destroyed all records of their assignments, ensuring no paper trail connected them to Anlage Hex. The laboratory had supplies for 3 months: canned rations, water from an underground spring Werner had tapped during construction, electrical power from diesel generators with adequate fuel reserves. Werner could have stayed longer, but remaining in Germany grew more dangerous daily. American and Soviet occupation zones were being established. Travel restrictions were imminent. Werner needed to leave Germany entirely, but not through official channels. He needed an escape network. That network already existed. Odessa, Organisation der ehemaligen SS-Angehörigen, the organization of former SS members, was a myth and a reality simultaneously. No single organization by that name existed, but multiple networks facilitated Nazi escapes through interconnected safe houses, forged documents, and cooperative officials. Werner had established contact with one such network in March 1945 through encrypted correspondence with SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny, Hitler's commando specialist, who was already planning his own escape. Skorzeny's reply, received via courier on March 28, 1945, provided coded instructions: reach Bremerhaven by May 20, 1945. Contact Seehund, Seal, at the Hafen-Nape Tavern, Kirchenpowerstrasse 21. Bring gold. Werner had gold. Over the previous year, he had systematically requisitioned gold from SS supplies intended for weapons procurement, small amounts, never enough to trigger investigation. By April 1945, Werner possessed 11 kilograms of gold bullion, hidden in lead-lined containers in the laboratory. Werner made his final laboratory entry, the one investigators would discover 79 years later. He packed essential items: identity papers for Wilhelm Hartman, the gold bullion, civilian clothing purchased months earlier, topographical maps, and a Walther P-38 pistol with 3 magazines. Then Werner destroyed his life's work. Thermite charges, positioned throughout the laboratory over the preceding week, would incinerate research documents, laboratory journals, and experimental equipment. The charges were set to detonate 12 hours after Werner departed, giving him time to reach safe distance but ensuring complete destruction of evidence. But Werner made one critical error. He didn't account for the thermite failing to fully ignite due to insufficient oxygen in the sealed underground laboratory. The fire would consume approximately 60% of materials before exhausting available oxygen and smothering itself, leaving enough evidence for investigators in 2024 to reconstruct his work and his escape. Werner exited the laboratory through a secondary escape tunnel, a precaution he'd insisted on during construction, over the objections of SS engineers who considered it unnecessary expense. The tunnel emerged 3 kilometers from the main facility entrance, disguised as a natural cave opening on the mountain's northern slope, coordinates 51, 7,691 degrees N, 10, 2012 degrees E. Werner carried 2 rucksacks, one containing the gold, the other his personal effects. He wore civilian clothing, a laborer's work jacket, wool trousers, sturdy boots, and carried forged papers identifying him as Wilhelm Hartman, traveling to Hamburg to seek work in reconstruction efforts. At 04:37 hours, Werner activated the demolition charges via a remote detonator. The main entrance tunnel collapsed in a precisely calculated sequence, burying the laboratory under 11,000 tons of rock. The secondary escape tunnel remained intact, but Werner had rigged its entrance to collapse after his passage. At 05:15 hours, Werner triggered the second set of charges. Rock fall sealed the escape route behind him. Werner Heisenberg Kessler ceased to exist. Wilhelm Hartman began his journey north. Werner traveled by night, hiding by day in forests, barns, abandoned buildings. The landscape was chaos, refugees fleeing east to west, slave laborers liberated from camps wandering aimlessly, Wehrmacht remnants deserting, Allied patrols establishing control. In this chaos, one more displaced person attracted no attention. Werner's route avoided major roads and cities. From the Brocken's northern slope, he traveled northwest through the Harz foothills, bypassing Goslar, then across the lower Saxon plain through agricultural regions where Allied presence remained sparse in late April and early May. The journey of approximately 240 kilometers required 16 days. Werner averaged 15 kilometers per day, conservative by military standards but prudent for a man avoiding detection. Critical waypoints included: May 1, 1945. Near Wienenberg, 30 kilometers north of the Brocken, Werner sheltered in an abandoned railway station, sharing space with a family of Belgian refugees who asked no questions. German surrender would come in 7 days, but information traveled slowly. Most people believed the war would continue weeks or months longer. May 4, 1945. South of Braunschweig, Werner observed American armored columns entering the city from a forest position 2 kilometers east. He waited 3 days for the military traffic to diminish before skirting the city's eastern perimeter. May 8, 1945. Germany officially surrendered. Werner, camping in forest near Soltau, 90 kilometers south of Bremerhaven, listened to the announcement on a portable radio. His reaction, recorded in a private journal he would maintain for years: "The Reich is dead. I am free." May 14, 1945. Werner reached Bremerhaven's outskirts at dusk. The city was heavily damaged from Allied bombing but functional under British military administration. Werner needed to enter the city, locate the contact address, and arrange passage out of Germany, all without attracting attention from British authorities conducting denazification screenings. He waited until dark, then walked into the city as one more anonymous, displaced person seeking survival in the ruins of the Third Reich. Dr. Helena Kreisler stood before a whiteboard covered in timeline notations, evidence photographs, and red string connecting disparate elements, the visual representation of an investigative puzzle 80 years in the making. The team assembled around her represented multiple disciplines: forensic archaeology, document analysis, historical research, and because the discovery had immediate legal implications, representatives from the Federal Office for Justice. The question they faced wasn't academic. If Werner Heisenberg Kessler survived 1945, where did he go? Did he face justice for any crimes, or did he live unpunished into old age? Were there living descendants who might claim rights to the discovered materials? And most pressingly, what exactly had Werner been researching in this hidden laboratory? Dr. Johann Mayer received the first batch of recovered documents under strict chain-of-custody protocols. His preliminary analysis, completed over 72 hours of continuous work, provided disturbing insights. The laboratory journals, despite water damage and partial fire destruction, remained substantially legible. Werner's handwriting, precise, methodical, eerily beautiful in its geometric consistency, filled 347 pages spanning January 1943 through April 28, 1945. Handwriting analysis compared these journals to verified exemplars from Werner's academic publications, Wehrmacht personnel files, and patent applications. Dr. Mayer employed three methodologies: traditional comparative analysis, digital morphological assessment, and pressure pattern analysis using reflective microscopy. Results confirmed with 99.7% confidence that Werner Heisenberg Kessler authored the journals. But confirmation of authorship raised more questions than it answered. The entries described research into electromagnetic pulse generation, primitive EMP weapon development, combined with theoretical work on radioactive material dispersal. Werner had been attempting to create a weapon that combined radioactive materials with conventional explosives, dispersing radiation across a wide area. A dirty bomb in modern terminology, though Werner's 1940s research lacked the theoretical framework to fully realize such a weapon's potential. This wasn't theoretical research, Dr. Mayer briefed investigators on March 26. Journal entries from March 1945 describe 3 prototype devices constructed and tested in an unspecified location. The tests used conventional explosives and trace radioactive materials. Werner wrote that he obtained radium from medical equipment stockpiles. The prototypes apparently failed to achieve meaningful radioactive dispersal, but the intent was clear. This discovery elevated the investigation's urgency. If Werner had conducted radioactive experiments in the Harz region, there might be contaminated sites requiring environmental remediation. And if Werner had escaped Germany, had he taken plans or materials with him? Parallel to forensic analysis, historical researchers began reconstructing Werner's family tree. The goal: identify potential descendants who might possess knowledge of Werner's post-war life. The family tree proved tragically sparse. Werner's parents, both deceased by 1939, his father from stroke in 1936, his mother from cancer in 1938, left no other children. Werner's marriage to Elsa produced Greta and Klaus, both killed in 1943. Official records showed no subsequent marriages or children. But genealogical researcher Dr. Sabine Herfner, specialist in Nazi-era family reconstruction, discovered an anomaly in Swiss immigration records. A residence permit application filed in Zurich on November 4, 1952, listed Wilhelm Hartman, born February 14, 1905, Stuttgart, occupation, industrial chemist. The application included a passport photograph. The face in the photograph matched Werner Heisenberg Kessler's 1943 SS identification photo with startling similarity. Same prominent cheekbones, same thin lips, same deep-set eyes. Age progression software, applied by Swiss forensic specialists on April 5, 2024, confirmed with 94% probability that the two photographs depicted the same individual aged by 7 years. Werner hadn't just survived, he'd established a new life in Switzerland. The Swiss residence permit opened investigative floodgates. Wilhelm Hartman had lived in Zurich from 1952 until 1959, working for Hoffmann La Roche, the pharmaceutical company, as a research chemist. Employment records showed competent but unremarkable performance. No publications, no patents, no distinction. Hartman kept to himself, lived alone in an apartment at Lerwinstrasse 42, and maintained minimal social connections. But bank records told a different story. Account number 780-42-21935, opened November 12, 1952, under the name Wilhelm Hartman, showed an initial deposit of 64,000 Swiss francs, approximately 15,000 US dollars at 1952 exchange rates. For reference, the average Swiss annual income in 1952 was 6,000 francs. Investigators immediately recognized the source: gold converted to currency. 11 kilograms of gold, worth approximately $13,000 in 1945, would have appreciated to roughly $15,000 by 1952, accounting for gold price increases in post-war years. Werner had funded his Swiss life with stolen SS gold. Transaction records showed Hartman living modestly, spending little, making regular small transfers to an account at Banco do Brasil, branch office in Sao Paulo. Werner was sending money to South America. Brazilian immigration records, digitized in a 2018 modernization project, showed Wilhelm Hartman arriving at Santos port on July 7, 1959, aboard the cargo vessel MS Senta, sailing from Genoa, Italy. Declared occupation: retired chemist. Declared purpose: permanent residence. Brazilian visa records showed Hartman petitioning for permanent residency on August 4, 1959, approved September 30, 1959. He listed an address in Sao Paulo's Muca district, a working-class neighborhood populated largely by Italian and German immigrants. Property records revealed that Hartman purchased a small house at Rua Visconde de Parnaíba, 847, in October 1959, for 18,000 cruzeiros, approximately $600 US, a modest sum suggesting continued frugality. Werner Heisenberg Kessler had reinvented himself twice, first as Wilhelm Hartman in Switzerland, then as Wilhelm Hartman in Brazil. But why leave Switzerland, a safe haven where he'd lived undetected for 7 years? Brazilian investigative journalist Carla Mendes, working with German researchers, located the current resident of Rua Visconde de Parnaíba, 847, Anna Hartman, age 71, who identified herself as Wilhelm Hartman's granddaughter. The interview, conducted April 15, 2024, and video recorded with Anna's permission, provided stunning revelations. "My grandfather Wilhelm died in 1987, Anna explained in Portuguese, translated by interpreters. I was 34 years old. He lived with us, my parents and me, from 1972 until his death. He never spoke about his life before Brazil. My father said Opa came to Brazil before I was born, that he'd been a chemist in Europe but wanted a quieter life." Investigators showed Anna the 1943 photograph of Werner Heisenberg Kessler in SS uniform. Anna's face went pale. "That's Opa," she whispered. "But he told us he was never a Nazi. He said he worked in a factory, that he fled Germany because of the war. He said he hated the Nazis." Further investigation revealed that Anna's father, Hans Hartman, born 1941 in Switzerland, was Werner's biological son, born to a Swiss woman, Clara Bitterly, whom Werner had met in 1952 shortly after arriving in Zurich. Clara and Werner never married, but Werner provided financial support for Hans throughout childhood. Hans grew up in Clara's household, visiting Werner occasionally but never living with him permanently. When Werner fled to Brazil in 1959, reasons still unclear but possibly related to increasing Nazi hunting efforts in Europe, he left Hans in Switzerland with Clara. The regular payments to Brazil, noted in Swiss bank records, were actually payments from Werner to Clara for Hans's support, routed through Brazil to obscure Werner's Swiss location. Hans emigrated to Brazil in 1965, established contact with Werner, and eventually brought his family, including young Anna, born 1953, to live near his father. Werner, by then 61 years old and living under the Wilhelm Hartman identity for 20 years, became Opa to Anna, the doting grandfather who spoke German with an odd accent and seemed sad when looking at old photographs. Anna provided investigators with a box of Werner's personal effects preserved after his death in 1987. Among them, a photograph of two children, a boy and a girl, dated 1941 in faded ink on the reverse. The children's faces were clearly visible. Greta and Klaus, Werner's lost children from his first marriage, photographed 2 years before their deaths. Werner had carried their photograph for 44 years, across 3 countries, through 2 false identities, hiding a grief he could never acknowledge without revealing his true identity. Anna Hartman consented to DNA testing to conclusively establish her relationship to Werner Heisenberg Kessler. Investigators also obtained DNA samples from living relatives of Elsa Adler, second cousins who still resided in Germany, to establish Werner's genetic profile through his first wife's family. Results, completed April 24, 2024, confirmed with 99.99% certainty that Anna Hartman was Werner Heisenberg Kessler's biological granddaughter. Werner had survived. He had escaped. He had lived under a false identity for 42 years, dying of natural causes, heart failure, according to the Brazilian death certificate filed September 12, 1987, in Sao Paulo at age 82, surrounded by family who never knew his real name. With Brazilian records confirming Werner's survival into 1987, investigators focused on reconstructing his 1945 escape route from Germany to Switzerland. The journey between May 14, 1945, when Werner reached Bremerhaven, and November 1952, when he appeared in Switzerland, represented a 7-year gap requiring explanation. Declassified intelligence files from Operation Paperclip, the American program recruiting German scientists, and Operation Selection Board, the British equivalent, provided crucial context. The files, released between 2015 and 2021 under Freedom of Information requests, showed that multiple Nazi scientists and officials escaped Germany through Bremerhaven between 1945 and 1948 using a network codenamed Spider, operated by former SS officers. British intelligence reports from 1947, authored by MI6 agent Christopher Harding, described Spin's operations. The network facilitates departures from Bremerhaven port using corrupted port officials, forged travel documents, and vessels sailing to Spain and Italy. Escapees typically travel first to Spain, where Falangist sympathizers provide safe houses, then to Italy, where Catholic Church officials assist onward travel to South America. Estimates suggest 300 to 500 individuals escaped Germany via this route between 1945 and 1947. Investigators hypothesized Werner followed this route, departing Bremerhaven for Spain in mid to late 1945, then traveling to Italy by 1946. Under pressure from German and Brazilian governments, Vatican officials provided limited access to Pontifical Commission for Assistance records from 1940-51955, the organization that aided European refugees, including, controversially, Nazi war criminals. Records showed Wilhelm Hartman receiving humanitarian assistance in Rome on March 14, 1947. The file included a photograph matching Werner's appearance, a request for travel documents to Argentina, and a notation. Approved, documents issued March 28, 1947. But Werner apparently never traveled to Argentina. Instead, evidence suggests he remained in Italy until approximately 1952, possibly working under the table in industrial positions while monitoring European political developments. Why Switzerland instead of South America? Investigators believe Werner, watching Nazi hunters like Simon Wiesenthal achieve success tracking fugitives in South America, calculated that Switzerland offered better anonymity. As Wilhelm Hartman, a mundane industrial chemist with no criminal record, Werner could live openly in Switzerland, while Nazi hunters focused resources on South American fugitives. The calculation worked for 7 years, but by 1959, Nazi hunting intensified globally. Adolf Eichmann's capture in Argentina on May 11, 1960, demonstrated that even South America wasn't safe. Werner apparently decided that Brazil, with its massive German immigrant population and less cooperation with international Nazi hunters, offered better long-term safety than Switzerland. He was right. Werner lived another 28 years in Brazil, completely undetected. May 14, 1945, Bremerhaven, Germany, 22 hours. Werner reached the Hafen-Nape Tavern on Kirchenpowerstrasse 21 after navigating through British-controlled checkpoints using his Wilhelm Hartman papers. The tavern, remarkably undamaged despite Bremerhaven's heavy bombing, operated openly under British occupation, serving dock workers, displaced persons, and, unbeknownst to British authorities, facilitating Nazi escapes. Werner entered, ordered beer, and waited. At 23 hours, a man approached his table, middle-aged, weathered face, sailor's clothing. "See Hund?" Werner asked quietly, using the code name from Skorzeny's letter. The man nodded. "You have payment." Werner indicated his rucksack, 11 kilograms. "That will take you far," Sihun replied. "But not immediately. Bremerhaven is watched. British intelligence suspects escape networks but hasn't identified operatives yet. You'll shelter here 2 months, maybe 3, until surveillance relaxes and we can arrange departure." Werner spent the next 73 days in a safe house at Stresemannstrasse 93, a nondescript apartment building 4 blocks from the waterfront. The apartment, occupied officially by dock worker Hermann Kreisler and his wife Maria, contained a hidden room behind a false wall in the pantry, barely 3 meters by 2 meters, windowless, ventilated through a concealed duct. 5 other fugitives shared the space at various times during Werner's stay. None used real names. Werner identified them only by appearance: an aging Wehrmacht colonel with a limp, a younger man with SS tattoos inadequately disguised with burns, a woman who cried silently during nights, a thin man who mumbled constantly in Ukrainian, and a heavy-set man who spoke no German but whose SSVT collar-tab scars identified him as Waffen-SS. Sihun visited weekly, bringing food and updates. The escape route, he explained, operated in stages. Stage 1. Bremerhaven to La Coruña, Spain, via Danish fishing vessel. The journey covered approximately 1,800 kilometers along the European Atlantic coast, requiring 7 to 10 days depending on weather and British patrol routes. Payment: 2 kilograms of gold per person. Stage 2. La Coruña to Madrid by truck, disguised as agricultural workers. Spanish fascist contacts provided safe houses and false identity papers. Payment: 1 kilogram of gold. Stage 3. Madrid to Barcelona by rail, then Barcelona to Genoa, Italy, via cargo ship. Italian dockworkers, many with fascist sympathies, facilitated arrivals. Payment: 1 kilogram of gold. Stage 4. Genoa to South America via transatlantic cargo vessels. Multiple routes available: Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay. Payment: 3 kilograms of gold plus additional fees for priority placement and improved accommodations. The network's pricing was deliberately high, ensuring only those with substantial resources, stolen gold, embezzled funds, family wealth, could afford passage. This financial barrier inadvertently filtered clients, selecting for high-ranking Nazis and wealthy collaborators while excluding ordinary soldiers and minor officials. Werner had barely sufficient funds for the complete journey. He negotiated with Seehund to reduce Stage 4 costs by accepting minimal accommodations and no priority placement. Final agreement: 9 kilograms of gold for passage to Italy, with 2 kilograms retained for establishing new life. At 3 hours, Werner and 4 other fugitives, including the Wehrmacht colonel and the younger SS man, boarded a 40-meter fishing trawler, the Nordstern, registered in Esbjerg, Denmark. The vessel's captain, a Dane named Christian Andersen, showed neither sympathy nor hostility toward his human cargo. This was business. The fugitives hid in a concealed compartment below the fish hold, a space reeking of brine and decay, barely tall enough to sit upright. The compartment measured 5 meters long by 3 meters wide, housing 5 men for the next 9 days. Conditions were medieval. A single bucket served as toilet, emptied daily when the captain opened the hatch to provide food: hard bread, salted fish, water. The men spoke little, each lost in private fears and calculations. British patrols inspected the Nordstern twice, once on July 29 off Helgoland, and again on August 1 near Danish waters. Both times, inspectors examined the fish hold but never discovered the concealed compartment beneath. The captain's cooperative demeanor and properly forged manifests deflected suspicion. The Nordstern docked at La Corunia's commercial port at 21:00 hours. Spanish customs officials, bribed in advance, ignored the fugitives as they disembarked quickly and disappeared into the port district's narrow streets. A truck waited at Cal Panadera's 17. The driver, a Falangist volunteer named Miguel Santillana, transported the 5 Germans to a farmhouse 30 kilometers inland, near the village of Batenzoes. Werner spent 3 weeks at the farmhouse, sharing space with a rotating population of German fugitives, never more than 8 at any time, never fewer than 4. Some were Wehrmacht officers fleeing war crimes charges. Others were SS men evading capture. One was a Ukrainian Waffen-SS volunteer fleeing Soviet repatriation. They shared one commonality: desperation. The farmhouse operation, run by an elderly Spanish couple sympathetic to fascism, provided basic shelter and food while contacts in Madrid arranged onward travel. Payment was required up front. Werner surrendered 1 kilogram of gold on August 8, 1945, receiving a receipt written in German. Payment received for transport services and documentation. A cargo truck departed Batenzoes at 04:00 hours, carrying 12 fugitives hidden beneath canvas tarps and crates of vegetables. The journey to Madrid covered approximately 600 kilometers, requiring 2 days with an overnight stop at a safe house in Valladolid. Werner, crammed between the Wehrmacht colonel and a new arrival, a Gestapo officer from Prague, endured 34 hours of discomfort, arriving in Madrid on August 28 at 14:00 hours. The Madrid safe house, located in the Carabanchel district at Cal General Ricardo's 134, operated openly as a boarding house for German refugees. Spanish authorities, aware of its true purpose, ignored it. Franco's government, though officially neutral, maintained sympathetic relations with former Nazis who might prove useful in post-war political calculations. Werner stayed in Madrid 6 months, far longer than planned. The delay resulted from bottlenecks in the Italy stage. Allied occupation of Italy complicated passage. British and American military police monitored ports carefully. The escape network's Italian contacts required time to arrange safe passage for the growing backlog of fugitives. During these months, Werner worked under the table at a chemical factory in Madrid's industrial district, earning pesetas for basic expenses while his gold remained hidden. He lived quietly, avoided attention, and slowly perfected his Wilhelm Hartman identity through practice and documentation refinement. Werner finally received notification. Passage to Barcelona arranged. Departure February 14th by rail. He traveled with false papers identifying him as Gustav Neumann, a displaced Austrian seeking work in Barcelona's port industries. The train journey proved uneventful, a relief after months of tension. Werner arrived in Barcelona on February 15, 1946, and proceeded to a safe house in the Barcelona district, Cara de la Maquinista 42, operated by a former German naval officer named Klaus Brandt. Brandt, who had deserted the Kriegsmarine in 1944 and established himself in Spain, ran a sophisticated operation, forged documents, secure transport, reliable contacts in Italian ports. His fee was steep, 1.5 kilograms of gold, but his success rate was reportedly perfect. "No one I've sent to Italy has been captured," Brandt assured Werner. "My Italian partners are professionals. You'll arrive safely." Werner boarded the cargo vessel Santa Catarina at Barcelona's Port Vell at 23:00 hours. The ship, registered in Panama but operated by Italian crew, carried legitimate cargo, textiles, machinery, chemicals, plus 16 clandestine passengers hidden in a modified cargo hold. The voyage to Genoa required 4 days, arriving March 7, 1946. Italian port workers, coordinated by Brandt's contacts, facilitated smooth disembarkation. Werner walked off the Santa Catarina at 19:00 hours, carrying his remaining gold and his Wilhelm Hartman documents, and disappeared into Genoa's crowded port district. He had crossed from Germany to Italy through 3 countries, traveling approximately 3,800 kilometers, evading Allied authorities, surviving on stolen gold and forged papers. Werner Heisenberg Kessler, officially dead since April 11, 1945, was alive and free in Italy. But his journey to safety wasn't complete. He still needed to establish a sustainable false identity, secure legitimate employment, and decide his ultimate destination. Those challenges would occupy the next 6 years. Werner's movements between March 1946 and November 1952 remain partially obscure, the period least documented in the investigative reconstruction. What evidence exists suggests Werner remained in Italy until approximately 1950, working in chemical industries near Milan and Turin under false identities, establishing financial reserves beyond his remaining gold. Italian industrial employers, desperate for skilled workers in post-war reconstruction, asked few questions about employees' backgrounds. Werner's legitimate expertise in chemistry made him valuable. He worked quietly, saved diligently, and monitored European political developments through newspapers. By 1950, Werner had apparently accumulated sufficient legitimate earnings to supplement his remaining gold. He began planning the next identity transition, from itinerant worker to settled professional in a secure location. Switzerland offered optimal conditions: neutrality, strong banking privacy, demand for skilled chemists, and critically, less intensive denazification screening than Germany or Austria. Werner's arrival in Switzerland, documented by the November 1952 residence permit, marked the beginning of his most successful reinvention. For 7 years, he lived as Wilhelm Hartman, unremarkable industrial chemist in Zurich, close enough to his German homeland to follow developments, far enough to avoid recognition. The spin network had delivered Werner from Germany to Italy. Personal initiative and patience carried him from Italy to Switzerland. And when Switzerland grew too dangerous in 1959, his accumulated resources enabled one final escape: to Brazil, where he would live in obscurity for 28 more years. October 1959, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Rua Visconde de Parnaíba 847. Werner arrived in Sao Paulo as a 65-year-old man, with a lifetime of secrets compressed into 2 kilograms of luggage. The house he purchased, a modest single-story dwelling with whitewashed walls and terracotta roof tiles, sat in a working-class neighborhood where German immigrants were common enough that Wilhelm Hartmann's accented Portuguese attracted no attention. Brazilian immigration documents from 1959 listed Hartmann's occupation as retired chemist, his savings as adequate for self-support, and his sponsor as German-Brazilian Mutual Aid Society, a legitimate organization assisting German immigrants, unaware they were facilitating a Nazi fugitives' resettlement. Werner's life in Brazil, reconstructed from interviews with Anna Hartman and Brazilian public records, followed a pattern of deliberate invisibility. He maintained no bank accounts beyond basic checking for bill payment. He cultivated no friendships outside superficial acquaintances with neighbors. He joined no clubs, attended no churches, participated in no community organizations. But he maintained one connection to his past: correspondence with his son Hans, still living in Switzerland with his mother Clara. Among Werner's effects preserved by Anna were 17 letters, handwritten on thin airmail paper, sent from Switzerland between 1960 and 1965. The letters, written in German, came from Hans Hartman, Werner's son, then aged 19 to 24. The letters reveal a young man curious about his distant father, asking questions about Werner's past, his reasons for leaving Switzerland, his life in Brazil. Werner's replies, 13 letters preserved in Swiss archives by Hans's family after his death in 2003, show a man carefully constructing a false narrative while struggling with desire to connect authentically with his son. One letter, dated June 12, 1961, shows this tension clearly. Dear Hans, you ask about my childhood in Stuttgart. I remember little. My father worked in manufacturing, my mother kept house. It was ordinary. We were not wealthy, not poor. When the war came, I worked in a factory. I was not a Nazi. I believed in none of that madness. After the war, I fled the chaos, came to Switzerland and later to Brazil because I wanted peace. This is the truth. I wanted peace. Your loving father, Wilhelm. Every sentence was a lie wrapped around a fragment of truth. Werner's father was a university professor, not a factory worker. Werner was SS, not an apolitical factory employee. He fled not chaos but justice. Yet the emotional truth remained. Werner wanted peace, wanted to escape a past that consumed his family, wanted, perhaps, redemption through connection with the son who represented his only untainted relationship. Hans emigrated to Brazil in March 1965, bringing his wife and young daughter Anna. The reunion between Werner and Hans, their first meeting since 1959, occurred at Santos Port on March 17, 1965. Anna, age 12 at the time and present for the meeting, recalled in her 2024 interview, Opa stood on the dock, very straight, very formal. When my father approached, Opa embraced him but said nothing for a long time. I remember thinking he looked sad, like he was hugging someone he'd lost. Hans settled his family in Sao Paulo, working as an accountant for a German-owned import-export firm. Werner saw his family weekly, always at their home, never inviting them to his own. This pattern continued until 1972, when Werner, then age 67 and experiencing declining health, accepted Hans's invitation to move into their home. For the next 15 years, Werner lived with Hans's family in their house at Rua Mater de Deus 1847, a larger property in the Muca district. Anna, then 19 and studying pharmacy at university, lived at home and spent considerable time with her grandfather. Opa helped me with chemistry homework, Anna recalled. He was brilliant. He could explain complex concepts simply, make connections I never saw. He never mentioned his academic background. I assumed he'd learned chemistry working in factories. Only decades later, after his death, when I researched German industrial history, did I realize the depth of his knowledge suggested university education, possibly advanced degrees. Werner never revealed his PhD, his publications, his patents, his career in weapons research. He remained Wilhelm Hartman, factory chemist, retired and content in Brazil. On September 9, 1987, Werner suffered a massive myocardial infarction while reading in the garden at his son's house. Hans called emergency services at 15:23 hours. Paramedics arrived 15 minutes later but could not revive him. Werner Friedrich Heisenberg Kessler died at 15:47 hours September 9, 1987 in Sao Paulo, Brazil at age 82. His death certificate listed his name as Wilhelm Hartman. Cause of death: acute myocardial infarction. Contributing factors: atherosclerosis, hypertension. Occupation: retired chemist. Hans arranged a simple funeral. Werner was cremated September 11, 1987, at Villa Alpina Cemetery. His ashes were buried in an unmarked plot, Section 4, Row 12, Position 34, coordinates that would remain unknown to German investigators until April 2024, when Anna provided the location. No memorial service was held. No obituary was published. Wilhelm Hartman vanished from existence as quietly as Werner Heisenberg Kessler had 42 years earlier. Among Werner's personal effects preserved by Anna was a small leather-bound journal, separate from his laboratory notebooks, a personal diary Werner maintained sporadically between 1945 and 1985. The journal, written in German with occasional Portuguese phrases in later entries, was provided to investigators on April 20, 2024. The journal's entries reveal a man haunted by moral complexity. An entry from November 8, 1954, Werner's 50th birthday, reads, 50 years, half a century. I have lived 22 years beyond my children. They would be adults now. Greta would be 23, Klaus 20. What would they think of me? I saved myself. I could not save them. I chose my work over my family, and then I chose my survival over justice. What am I? Not a monster. I killed no one with my hands, but not innocent. I built weapons meant to kill. I served evil men. I fled rather than face judgment. I am alive, and my children are ashes. This is my mathematics. Later entries suggest Werner struggled with whether to reveal his identity, especially after Hans entered his life. An entry from December 1973 reads, Hans asked today about my childhood again. He senses gaps in my stories, contradictions. Should I tell him? He deserves truth, but truth would destroy him. Better he believe his father was an ordinary man who lived an ordinary life. The truth, that his father built dirty bombs for the SS, that he escaped justice, that every moment of our life together is based on lies, would break him. My silence is cruel kindness. Werner never revealed the truth to Hans or Anna. He carried his identity to his grave, or rather to his crematorium furnace. The ashes buried in Villa Alpina Cemetery were those of Werner Heisenberg Kessler, but the name on the plot reads Wilhelm Hartman. Even in death, Werner maintained his deception. May 2024, International Symposium on Nazi Escapes, Berlin. The discovery of Werner Heisenberg Kessler's hidden laboratory and the reconstruction of his escape and subsequent life raised profound questions presented at an international symposium attended by historians, ethicists, forensic specialists, and representatives from Jewish organizations. This question dominated symposium discussions. Dr. Michael Rothstein, historian specializing in Nazi science at Hebrew University, argued, Werner's research aimed to create weapons of mass destruction, radiological dispersal devices intended to contaminate Allied cities. His laboratory journals describe plans to deploy these weapons against civilian populations. Intent matters. Werner intended mass casualties. That his prototypes failed technically doesn't absolve moral responsibility. He is culpable. Counterarguments emerged from Dr. Heike Müller, historian at Humboldt University. Werner never succeeded in deploying radiological weapons. No evidence suggests his devices caused casualties. his research remained theoretical and experimental. Thousands of scientists in America, Britain, the Soviet Union conducted similar research. We judge those scientists differently because they worked for victorious powers. Werner's crime was serving the losing side while doing what scientists in all nations did: research weapons for their governments. The debate reflects broader questions about scientific responsibility during wartime. Were German scientists who researched weapons uniquely evil, or were they performing the same roles as Allied scientists, merely serving a criminal regime? The consensus leaned toward culpability, but not of the highest degree. Werner wasn't comparable to Mengele, who conducted horrific human experiments, or Eichmann, who orchestrated genocide logistics. Werner was a weapons researcher whose creations never killed anyone, a significant moral distinction, even if his intent was murderous. Werner escaped all accountability. He died peacefully, surrounded by family in his 80s, an outcome denied to millions of Holocaust victims and war casualties. Rabbi David Steinberg, representing the Simon Wiesenthal Center, addressed this at the symposium. Every Nazi who escaped justice represents failure. Not legal failure. International law was underdeveloped in 1945. Extradition procedures unclear. Moral failure. Werner lived 42 years under false identity, enjoying family, comfort, security. His victims received none of these. His escape mocks justice. We cannot undo this injustice now, but we must acknowledge it and learn from it. Future war criminals must know escape will not succeed. The practical reality is that thousands of Nazis escaped justice. Operation Paperclip brought Nazi scientists to America. Operation Osowieckim brought Nazi scientists to the Soviet Union. Ratlines run by various networks facilitated escapes to South America, the Middle East, and elsewhere. Werner was one fugitive among thousands. Does this ubiquity diminish individual culpability? The symposium's consensus was clear. No. Each escape represents individual failure of justice. That many escape doesn't excuse any individual escape. Perhaps the most wrenching ethical question: what responsibility do Werner's descendants bear? Anna Hartman, interviewed after providing evidence to investigators, expressed profound distress. "My grandfather was a loving man to me. He helped with homework, told stories, showed affection. I knew him as Opa, as Wilhelm Hartman. Now I learn he was Werner Heisenberg Kessler, SS Major, weapons researcher, fugitive. How do I reconcile these identities? The man I loved was real. The criminal he was before I knew him was real. Both truths exist. I feel guilt, though intellectually I know I bear no responsibility for crimes committed before my birth, but emotionally. I loved a man who fled justice. That knowledge is burden I'll carry forever." Symposium ethicists emphasized that descendants bear no legal or moral responsibility for ancestors' crimes. Anna Hartman committed no wrong. Hans Hartman, who knew his father as Wilhelm and never learned the truth before his death in 2003, committed no wrong. Yet the emotional burden remains. Families of Nazi perpetrators face impossible situations, love for family members confronting horror at their crimes. German society has grappled with this collective burden for 80 years. Individual families bear concentrated versions of this national trauma. The discovery of Werner's laboratory ensures his story enters historical record. The Brocken site, after extensive archaeological excavation and environmental testing, which revealed low-level radioactive contamination requiring remediation, is being developed as a memorial and educational facility, scheduled to open in 2026. The memorial's purpose: not to celebrate Werner's scientific achievements, but to demonstrate the human capacity for moral compartmentalization. Werner was simultaneously brilliant scientist, loving grandfather, and fugitive from justice. Humans contain multitudes, including contradictions we prefer to deny. Dr. Rebecca Cohen, director of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, who consulted on the memorial design, stated. We must resist simplistic narratives. Werner wasn't a monster with horns. Those don't exist. He was human. That's the terrifying truth. Ordinary people, intelligent people, loving people can commit or facilitate atrocities. We honor victims not by demonizing perpetrators, but by understanding the human capacity for evil, so we can guard against it in ourselves. June 2025, Brocken Mountain Memorial Site. The entrance to Werner's laboratory, carefully excavated and reinforced, now admits visitors through a reconstructed tunnel. The laboratory itself, preserved as found, remains dimly lit, cool, silent except for the drip of groundwater and the whisper of ventilation fans maintaining stable temperature and humidity. Visitors walk through history, laboratory benches with their corroded equipment, filing cabinets with their waterlogged documents preserved behind glass, the leather satchel that contained Werner's identity papers, the map with its red ink escape route. Display panels tell Werner's story in German, English, and Hebrew. His academic career, his betrayal of family, his weapons research, his fake death, his escape, his 42 years as Wilhelm Hartman, his peaceful death in Brazil. One display case holds the photograph Werner carried for 44 years. Greta and Klaus, ages 10 and 8, smiling at the camera in 1941, 2 years before RAF bombs ended their lives. Adjacent to the photograph is an empty frame. Text below reads, "No photograph of Werner Heisenberg Kessler from his life as Wilhelm Hartman in Brazil has been preserved. He ensured no images existed that might reveal his identity. He lived as a ghost, present but invisible, known but unknown. In this empty frame, consider, how many others escaped similarly? How many war criminals lived among us, unrecognized, unpunished, their crimes forgotten, their identities buried as thoroughly as this laboratory beneath a mountain?" The memorial's final room contains a reflective pool, its dark water mirror-smooth, reflecting visitors' faces back to themselves. Text on the wall reads in 3 languages. In the face reflected in this water, see the human capacity for good and evil. Werner Heisenberg Kessler was brilliant and cruel, loving and cold, victim and perpetrator. He was human. So are you. What choices will you make? What compromises will you accept? What injustices will you flee or face? Outside, on the mountain slope where Werner emerged from his escape tunnel 80 years earlier, a simple granite marker bears an inscription. Here on April 29, 1945, SS Sturmbannführer Dr. Werner Friedrich Heisenberg Kessler, officially dead for 18 days, emerged from hiding and began a journey that would carry him across Europe to a new life under a false name. He was never caught. He was never tried. He died peacefully, surrounded by family who never knew his real identity. The earth kept his secret for 80 years. How many more secrets remain buried? The mountain wind whispers through the pines, carrying no answers, only questions. Justice delayed is justice denied. But sometimes justice isn't merely delayed. It vanishes entirely, buried under stone and time and carefully constructed lies. Werner's story is one of thousands. Most will never be uncovered. Most fugitives died taking their secrets to graves marked with false names. We can excavate laboratories, reconstruct escape routes, analyze documents, and trace genealogies. But we cannot recover lost justice. We cannot restore to victims what was stolen when their murderers escaped accountability. All we can do is remember, and in remembering, remain vigilant. Because the capacity for atrocity doesn't die with perpetrators. It lives in every generation, waiting for circumstances that enable evil to flourish. Werner succeeded in his escape. He lived a comfortable life, earned a granddaughter's love, died peacefully. History caught him 80 years too late. The question that haunts investigators, ethicists, historians, and visitors to the Brocken Memorial is simple and terrible. How many others are we still missing?